Welcome to the Accountants Exposed podcast, where we create light bulb moments for our listeners by exposing the journeys, secrets, and insights of some of the top players in accounting. This podcast is brought to you by Michael Edelstein, Director and Founder of Recruitment Expert, a specialist accounting recruitment agency working across Australia, New Zealand, and Asia Pacific. Hi, Matthew. Thank you for taking the time to join me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here, and greetings all.
So for those not familiar with your journey, can you enlighten us sort of how you went from being a partner in your own accounting firm to being an advocate for the bookkeeping industry?
Thanks, Michael. So my current role is Executive Director of the Institute of Certified Bookkeepers. That's a professional association in the bookkeeping space. It merged in Australia in 2005, 2006. And has continued to grow till today. That institute now has a team of 20 people. I divulged the CEO role and appointed another person to take over the CEO role, while my role in terms of advocacy and in terms of government liaison work just developed a little bit. So that's what I've been doing since 2005, 2006. I ran my own small business accounting tax practice for about 15 years. I was born and bred in a second-tier accounting firm, RSM Accountants, that national firm. That was my breeding ground. Then moved out of that firm, set up my own practice, and it was a really good time to set up an accounting practice, Michael. It was when desktop accounting software was just evolving. The MYBs were really hitting its stride in Australia. So those late 1990s. Really worked on bringing accounting software into a small business, helping them use that software, and that fed into the accounting practice really, really well. So,
was before that it was a very manual process, like books and ledgers?
Yeah, prior to the MYB days, you had the more expensive accounting packages. They were $10,000 for the general ledger, $10,000 for the accounts payable, $10,000 for accounts receivable. Then along came MYB, founded out of the US, which was going, here's an integrated accounting system, all of those modules for less than $1,000. So it really did change the face of how a small business could even think about, as you say, moving from the ledgers to a computerized system. And now we were invoicing, and it was in our system, and it was in our accounts. It wasn't.
Whereas before, a typical small business would literally just have manual ledgers?
Manual ledgers.
Excel spreadsheets. Or they would certainly not be integrated. So lots of shoebox invoices for the bookkeeper that comes once a week.
Correct. Lots of invoices. What was our invoice template? It was Word, or it was WordPress, or it was, you'd generate your invoice in Word, and then you'd go and key it into your accounting system later on. It changed in the late, and I think we all benefit now from integrated business and accounting systems. So
what made you go from being kind of a partner in traditional accounting practice to advocacy for bookkeeping? Because there's usually kind of a big divide between the two worlds, and I know there's a lot of overlap, but still, especially when you're as a CA, normally you're like, oh, I'm a CA, and somewhere below that there's probably CPA and IPA, and then below that there's bookkeepers. That's the traditional kind of snobbishness factor.
Yeah. Look, let me address a couple of things in there. I think we're in a world that we have different skill sets. So I don't think there's a hierarchy anymore. I will say to you, Michael, I'll say to the whole Australian environment, bookkeeping is a skill set. It's not just processing of what has already happened in a business. It's not just recording what's on the bank statement and giving it a code and getting that data processed. That's data processing. That's old school. That needs to nearly be automated. What bookkeeping is integrated business systems with the bookkeeping records and accounting records that facilitate natural business process. So there's a skill that bookkeepers have in working intimately with the business to work out how they trade, how they could embed technology, how they could create their business records really, really well. We have some overlap then creeping into the accounting space. So the accountants have a skill set, and right at the moment, Michael, what do we hear from every accounting practice? There is so much to do. We're overworked, we can't get to it all. So if an accounting practice concentrates on what they want to do, and their income tax work, maybe some of their high-end business advisory work, that type of thing, but leverage off work that a good professional bookkeeper has done, then the professional bookkeeper can use their expertise to get those business records right, hand them over to the accountant, so the accountant can then access the file and do what they need to do with those business records and the business information. Clearly, there's some overlap here. And Michael, you and I have talked in preparation about some accountants want to do bookkeeping and some bookkeeping stretches into the accounting space. I think there is a real distinction areas for the two groups, but there is some in the middle there that overlaps.
What do you think the industry is kind of trending towards? Because I know a lot of our clients, they either look, some of them partner with bookkeeping practices, but many of them actually, and more so sort of in the last 5 years, have started their own bookkeeping divisions or bought a bookkeeping practice, one of the ones they might have partnered with in the past, and offer that either as a good profitable division or as a loss leader sometimes to keep the clients, all in one kind of universe, but also to make their life easier, as you said before, because they get clean records and they can control the process versus a big complaint of theirs, which is, the bookkeeping is shit, then we have to fix it and blah, blah, blah. So how does it work with the kind of bookkeeping industry? How does it affect it?
So the one line that I heard loudly from what you just said, Michael, is some take up bookkeeping on as a loss leader to what they do. That's the wrong business model. There is no part of providing bookkeeping services that should be a loss leader or an attraction to clients to say, we'll make profit out of their accounting work, bookkeeping's a loss leader. It should not be the way it's positioned if they are doing true professional bookkeeping properly and creating the records the right way, cleaning them up, doing that bookkeeping process, which is not, as I said earlier, about just data processing. It's integrating what does the business do, how do they do it, natural business systems, and the accounting records fall out of the back of it. We're seeing from our spotters, Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, we are seeing elements of accounting firms bringing bookkeeping in-house. We are also seeing some accounting firms that are absolutely going, who can I engage with? What professional bookkeeping firm can I engage with? Yep. I'll refer clients to them. They look after this part of the business's needs, and then we get the clean records or we know where the lines are, and we as the accounting firm will take that over. Both trends are going on, Michael. One of the real trends we see in the bookkeeping space, if we go back 10, 15 years, 90% of my community would have been sole traders. It was an individual on their own doing bookkeeping for 2 to 5 businesses.
Yep.
In 2022, we're seeing about 50% of the community are in multi-person practices. So that's more than one bookkeeper. In some cases, I'm seeing teams of 15, 20, 25 people inside the bookkeeping practice, offering fully, multi-software solutions, multi-add-on solutions to the software. And those firms might be working with specific accounting firms or a number of accounting firms in who they provide their output to. So,
what is the ideal model, though? Is it better for an accounting firm to have their own bookkeeping division, or do you feel it's a small business, or in general the business community is best served by having that separation where there's bookkeeping firms and then there's accounting firms, and they're running as a separate thing?
I think the best model concept depends on the person, Michael. My best model is probably different to your best model, which is different to the guy down the street. I've seen some accounting practices who have gone to clients and said, we'll take all the bookkeeping in-house ourselves. And so they've shut off the external bookkeeper of that business. It got to Christmas. What do most accounting practices do pre-Christmas to about the middle of January? Right? We have a break. The accounting practice closes the doors. Well, we know of a couple of businesses that rang up their accounting practice, tried to ring up their accounting practice, because the accounting practice had taken over all bookkeeping, including payroll. Well, the accounting practice went on leave for 3 weeks. The business's payroll didn't get processed because we're shut. We're shut for 3 weeks. So what I'm trying to draw out there is the accounting practice who wants to bring bookkeeping in-house has got to work out what bookkeeping they're bringing in-house. What service do they want to work with? Because true professional bookkeeping is really assisting a business nearly on a daily basis in some cases. We have truly moved away from quarterly BAS work. You go in after the end of the quarter, you process all the data, lodge the BAS and move on. We've moved well beyond, in my view of the world, the accounting practice who touches a client once a year, right? Open up the software file once a year, let the accountant in, out pops the tax return, push the button, PDF or electronic signature, generated documents go out. I don't know that that is our current world. So when you talk about what's today's best practice, I think it is whatever model the accounting practice wants to develop to work with good bookkeepers is the model they should work with. Is it employing people themselves? Is it bringing a bookkeeping practice in-house? Or is it working with external bookkeepers that you have an arrangement with, you have a good communication channel with?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, like when you think of a bookkeeper, and I think I told you before, for me, the traditional kind of image that pops into my head is kind of 50 plus, female that has done a course in TAFE or maybe even nothing, and is doing bookkeeping. And I had a look at some stats sort of just before a conversation at the demographics, and I'm not sure whether they reflect the ICB ones. But I saw that only 33% are full-time. The average age is 48 years old, and 91% are female. So what does are they representative of what you see, but also what does a true professional bookkeeper look like? Then, are they work demographically, but also are they working in-house? Are they working for themselves? Are they working in a bookkeeping firm or an accounting firm? When you think of a bookkeeper, like what does that look like these days?
There's a little bit there. So typically, your profiling of what the stats say is yes, 80 to 90% are female, no question. Female-dominated profession. Full-time, you said 33%. That feels a bit light to me, based on the community that we see. I would have said again 50-50, and I've got some ICB stats, but I don't have them open in front of me about that community. But I would have said a bit more full-time. And certainly the bookkeeping community suffer from the same thing the accounting community does, the age of our communities. So 50 plus is absolutely spot on for the bookkeeping community. But I understand that's in the accounting and tax agent space as well. What we've got in terms of qualifications and the background to bookkeepers, Michael, is with the application of the Tax Agent Services Act in 2009, came into being in 2010, which changed the whole registration of tax practitioners, gave us the tax agent label properly, gave us the BAS agent label properly. And so in the BAS agent space, any external bookkeeper providing BAS services has to be registered. And to be registered, you've got to have your Cert 4. So your Cert 4 in bookkeeping and accounting financial services, as it's now designated. So that clearly meant a lot of the external bookkeepers needed to get that qualification and stomp up to being qualified. Prior to that being in place, a lot of the bookkeeping came out of supporting accounting firms, or I used to talk a lot about the accidental bookkeeper. It was the person who worked inside a business. They knew how to turn the computer on, so all of a sudden they got promoted to doing everything on the computer. So they would be using the accounting packages. And since 2000, as accounting packages were more affordable, I think there was a lot more of that. Most bookkeepers, Michael, to me, are employed. They're employed in businesses, or they're do-it-yourself bookkeepers inside businesses. So
So that's the majority of the community for you?
That is the majority of what
in-house?
what I believe is bookkeeping, is the in-house or do-it-yourself. As a professional association, who do we resource and who is most of our membership? Are those contract bookkeepers seeking to be professional to provide services to multiple businesses. So we do have a portion, about 5 to 10% of our membership, that are employed bookkeepers. So they work in slightly bigger firms, or they're employed in an accounting firm. That's a portion of our membership, but by far the majority are out there providing a bookkeeping business to other businesses. The other stat that's changed over the 15 years is, I said before, that the bookkeeper might have been working with 2 to 5 businesses. What we're seeing now is some are certainly happy working by themselves, working for 2 to 5. We're seeing a lot that have 100 and 150 or 200 clients. So you can imagine that.
Because they're much bigger.
They're much better.
Practices,
They're multi-purpose, but also software has changed the game. So with some of the cloud-based software, you're not required to go to the business premises to process. You can be a lot more efficient working with a lot more clients if you're using the best of breed software techniques.
Yeah, which is interesting because I think we touched on, in the past when I used to look at the bookkeeping industry, I saw a lot of like franchises that kept popping up. Whereas I'm thinking now, like franchises by definition are usually territory based of some sort. Whereas given that we've moved to a cloud system where a bookkeeper can be based anywhere, servicing anyone anywhere as well, is there room for the franchise model anymore, or whether it doesn't even make sense now?
It's a bit of a loaded question, Michael. I think the franchise model has its place in most industries and professions. There's I'm trying to think, is there a franchise model that is allowed as a franchise in the accounting space?
There are for e-tax, but usually focus on individual tax returns, I guess.
Yeah, e-tax is a different model, but there have been, I think,
H&R Blocks.
The old Count Wealth Accountants group. Those sort of things. So there has been franchise models in the bookkeeping space and the accounting space. There is still a couple of franchise models in the bookkeeping space. They provide their value. So people, buy into a franchise, be it a donut shop or be it a bookkeeping franchise, for the perceived value of attaching to that brand, that system, that support network, that resource. Now, arguably, as a professional association, we also go, what's part of our value to your bookkeepers is it's the support, it's the resource, it's the access to information, it's the giving you a voice. It's, we specifically certify your knowledge, which comes to a slightly developed version of that. So, there are some franchises around. There's been different success in some of those franchises, as in all industries.
100%.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's the lay of the land? I'm trying to get my head around, because I know there's I guess for everyone's benefit as well, I know there's ICB obviously, but then there's also ABA, the Australian Bookkeeping Association, and I think there's AAT, so the Association of Accounting Technicians. Is there kind of different representation across them, or do they serve different purposes, or is it kind of like CA and CPA where an IPA, there's just 3 bodies for the same kind of segment of the market?
So the 2 very active bookkeeping priority associations is ourself and ABA, Australian Bookkeeping Association. So our purpose is for the bookkeeping profession. AAT has been pretty much absorbed into being a division of IPA, the accounting body. So they certainly have a representative in the space, same as CPA and CA have a bit of a representation in the bookkeeping space. But ourselves and ABA are the active ones. What's the difference? our colour scheme's different. Our style is different. We get involved in different things, but I've got to say we work very strongly together on a number of fronts. When we're working with government or policy issues or things, we certainly talk a lot about making sure there's a unified front from the bookkeeping profession into government and to regulators and the tax office, and we confer quite often. So while we're competitors in the space for membership, we are similar in some senses. Our members will tell us our styles are different. So whether that's the personalities behind them or there's just different history behind the two organisations. ICB Australia is part of the ICB Global Network. ICB Global has a footprint in 135 countries around the world. ICB Australia is its own entity, but we are part of the ICB Global Network, which gives us the right to things like the crest and the branding and the name, and so some support infrastructure of also knowing what's going on around the world and what's likely to transition to Australia. ABA has a different history and therefore a different style about it, about where it is.
So if I was a bookkeeper, how would I go about, which association I choose? What would be my kind of parameters for that choice?
Oh, how do I answer that one? We watch Facebook and some of the Facebook groups fairly closely just to see what the lay of the land is in terms of people's feedback. We want to know what's going on or what people are thinking. There's a thread that came up on one of the bookkeepers groups recently as a person was evaluating, how do I do this? And it ended up, who should I join? And the bulk of the responses was ICB, 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 ICB. ABA got in. ABA was mentioned. But look, you've got to evaluate like you do chartered and CPA. Which one speaks to you? Which one gives you the resource or your style of support? Which one talks your language and you connect to? We have about 10% of our membership that would be members of ABA as well. So there is some overlap because some see benefits that they give that they perceive we don't give. So you have some overlap.
You mentioned one interesting thing just beforehand, being part of, I guess, the international network. What do you find are some differences in the bookkeeping world, say in Canada, US, UK versus Australia, and sort of the trends versus the direction of the last 10 years?
We annoy a lot of UK-based bookkeepers who come to Australia and go, just transfer our membership over from UK. And we go, so explain GST to me. And what they explain is VAT, because they're different. They are simply a different base. So until somebody's done a GST training or understands GST in Australia, we can't bring them over. Look, I think the bookkeeping journey in Australia is well developed in the better use of technology, of digitising businesses, of working with the business's natural business system. And by the way, we create the bookkeeping records and the GST records, and we do payroll in the software. I don't perceive that US have quite been on exactly the same journey, nor the UK. When I talk to my colleagues in other countries, it's still quite different. Checks are still a very big thing in the US.
It's ridiculous.
And I don't get it, right?
I don't get it either.
For a country that's supposed to lead the technology so much, they're still writing checks and processing checks. I mean, when I get a check here, I go, what? I've got to go and visit a bank and deposit this rotten thing? Where do I put it? How can I scan it and just have the bank accept that I got paid? So I think Australia's journey of digitising business processes and therefore digitising bookkeeping processes is in a very different spot to what I perceive overseas.
Okay, so that's the main difference for the kind of bookkeeping fraternity?
Yeah, I still read US as a lot more data processing in the way they do it. They record what's already happened.
Yeah.
UK are in a really different spot with their anti-money laundering requirements,
Mm.
and we're just starting to tread into know your client or prove your client's identity in Australia in a
Yeah.
enhanced way. UK are well over that. You as a professional bookkeeper or professional accountant, you can't work for that business unless you've done the 100-point ID check and you know they're not a criminal. Can I pick on Russia at the moment? You've got to know that they're not a Russian business, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not allowed to work on them. If you do work on them,
Mm.
there is financial and criminal penalties can be applied. So
So a bookkeeper has to do the verification
yeah,
for the client.
yeah. So
Yeah.
UK's in a different spot in terms of some of that regulation around how to work and what you're allowed to do. But again, I read the natural business processes in the UK is closer to Australia, but not
Yeah.
quite the same.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you say like bookkeeping is not recording or data processing or not recording the past, but I mean, I think most people have the perception of bookkeeping as that's kind of what it is. The bookkeeper does. I mean, with the exception of payroll, obviously, but you're making sure that the accounts are allocated properly and recorded properly. That is the bulk of the work, is it not?
So what did I do for my first 2 years as a graduate accountant in a second tier firm?
That.
You got your bank statements. You sat
Yeah.
there with your Solution 6 chart of accounts, and what did you do? You coded up all the bank statements, sent it down to the computer room, and back came your general ledger and your printouts and your such things. So I think historic data processing is a thing. It's a thing in part of bookkeeping. It's certainly a thing in part of accounting. But best practice bookkeeping, best practice accounting, to me, is inside every business, you've developed what is the right digitized natural business process that they could be
Hmm.
using. What's the best computer programs they could be using to capture the data? And what's the bookkeeper's role become? Giving certainty and verifying that the business records actually reflect what went on. So, yes, reconciling to the bank account. Um, there is bits of that historic catch-up that I think exist in both professions. But you asked earlier, what's the future? It is that digitisation of natural business systems, using the best of breed technology to
Mm.
use not artificial intelligence, because I don't think any programs are actually delivering us that yet, but it's augmented intelligence. It's us as a human using automation techniques to automate, memorize transactions, bank feed rules,
Yeah.
that sort of thing that auto codes, but then we come along and do that human rational check. Has the program processed
Verification.
it the way we wanted it to?
This was your topic at the Accounting and Business Expo where I came across you, wasn't
Sure.
it? What was it exactly? What was your topic kind of covering or your presentation?
Oh,
And maybe,
the future of bookkeeping, the future of
yeah, okay.
professional practice is
So,
where I went. So it's touched on some of the broad areas we've already touched on. Yeah,
but do you feel that's the future, or is that the present and that's kind of the expected skill set, or is it still a skill set that's beyond many traditional bookkeepers that are in your community or in just even outside your community?
I believe the professional bookkeeper of today is using best of breed digitized processes for all their clients and in their practice. But I'm a realist. There is still a journey to take some clients on. Some clients
Mm,
will not digitize. They like writing things in their invoice book. Yeah, they like doing
yeah,
things later, or their shoebox still comes along. What we're hearing from both bookkeeping firms and accounting firms is we actually don't want to work with that shoebox client anymore. It's
yeah,
not efficient. They don't like paying for the full suite of the time that the extra time it takes to process their shoebox. Whereas if they gave us
mm,
access to their software file because they'd been operating efficiently, then I, as a
yeah.
professional bookkeeper or professional accountant, I'd much prefer to work with that digitized process. Um,
Okay.
so, Michael, I am saying today's best practice is you're working with digitized natural business systems digitised bookkeeping, digitised accounting. But I'm a realist that there's a fair chunk of the Australian economy that are still very micro. Some are still very manual, but I think the future is they need to digitise.
But what do you think the bookkeeper, like, we looked at the profile, and I'm going to use stereotypes, but essentially you've got, Cert 4 qualified, where they might have done Cert 4 ages ago, was a bookkeeper for their husband's business, right? Like the traditional kind of bookkeeping stereotype. How adept would a typical bookkeeper be at the digital technology thing? Because we've got two stereotypes, like less educated, older generation that looks after the bookkeeping for most businesses. Are they adapt to bring a typical small business and go, hey guys, you should look at this and you should look at that integration and you should automate this and that? Are they even, are most bookkeepers in a position to provide that advice?
So in the community that we work with, absolutely, Michael. So to your point, should they have Cert 4? Yes, it is a baseline qual now for a bookkeeper. That especially if you're wanting to get some foundation knowledge. Is Cert 4 enough? No, it's not. So if you're working with software brand W, do you actually know how to use software brand W? You should do some additional training in that software to ensure that you're using it properly, you're using it competently, and using its current feature set. We would push both the bookkeeping and the accounting community who might have been on, let's say, MYB for its 25, 30-year history, and they ask for features, or they say, oh, I'm shifting software because this other software has just been sold to me and it's got this feature, whereas MYB's actually had the feature for 15 years. They've just never done any more training to understand how that software is developed. So in each of MYB, Xero, Reckon, Intuit, QBO, in any of those payroll add-ons, when was the last time you actually tapped into that software company to find in their best practice use of the software? What have they changed inside the software as feature enhancements or process changes over the last 12 months? Really, any professional, to me, should be connected to the software companies that they service or use their software, and they should be keeping themselves up to date. The professional bookkeepers we work with, Michael, are absolutely, they are on that road. They are on the road of...
And tax heavy and all the integration, etc. It was interesting because the point that you just made, the guest that I had on my podcast yesterday, Kylie Baxter from IQ Accountants, she is on my OBE, and we talked about how a lot of people are moving to, say, Xero and XPM, etc., and she's still on, and she's like, well, MyOb actually has a lot of features that most accountants don't even use or aren't even aware of the functionality. We use every single aspect of it. So why would I go to, say XPM or Xero when then I have to get the same functionality that MyOb has always offered for years and years? I have to get a million integrations from the Xero marketplace, and then they all have to work together really well, which reality is they probably won't, because there's always updates from one to another, and then there'll be conflicts, potentially conflict.
For an accounting practice to shift software platforms is not a small task. So the Australian Financial Review has an article in it, I believe it published yesterday, where a number of practices are complaining about the cost of swapping from platform to platform.
Handysoft, wasn't it?
That's the brand that they've moved away from, but the issue exists whichever platforms you swap to.
Getting the access to the old files.
Yeah, and those practitioners were commenting on the cost of the shift. Now, I have a slightly different view to what was being expressed in that article by those practitioners. But
what's your view?
Look, I think as a professional, whether you be a bookkeeper, whether you be in business for yourself, or you be a tax practitioner, an accountant, you have a record-keeping obligation, and you have a record-keeping right, and you have work papers. So what did we do in the old days? Our files would go to a storeroom. we would have to pay somebody to store them, or you'd pay for storage. If you were going to change storerooms, you'd throw out some of the old stuff and you would have a cost of shifting from the old storeroom to the new storeroom. What do we do now that software's come along? We've left it all digital. We've left it inside our platform. So if we're going to swap from platform A to platform B, we have a cost of shifting. Do we have extracts out of the old software? Have we PDF'd the tax returns and the general ledgers and such things out of the old platform so that we've got our 7 years of history, our work papers that might have been in the old platform? Because to my knowledge, there's not too many software platforms that have that button that says, I'm leaving, give me everything, so that I can go to somebody else's software and push the button that says, oh, I was on this brand, just input it all, and I'm up and running again. Funnily enough, the software companies don't have a lot of motivation to give you that ease to exit button. Now, in my dream world, Michael, I still go to the software companies. You should have the ability that I can pull off your system a PDF dump. Am I expecting it as data? That's really quite hard, because if I'm pulling it off as data, I've got to have somewhere to send that data. I've got to have the ability to read it. And that's quite a journey for us to go on. My view is, we all know we're in practice. We've got a record keeping obligation. If we're going to shift software platforms, we've got to go through that process of pulling what we want off the old software platform. Same goes for a business. You know, if a business was changing from brand W to brand N, you know, they've got 7 years of history they've got to keep. Statute of limitations on record keeping, I just go to 7 years. I don't think about the tax 5 years and blah, blah, blah. 7 years, statute of limitations. I need 7 years of general ledgers. I need 7 years of enough out of my old software. There are conversion programs that'll bring it across, but they don't tend to bring all the history all the time. But if you do, you got to pay for that conversion. So I just think there's a road of, as a professional, if I'm changing infrastructure, that's an acceptable decision. There's good reason sometimes to change platforms. Make sure you get your records off the old platform.
Well, one of the things kind of I mentioned before, just cloud accounting and small businesses, etc. I remember when when cloud accounting came out and Xero came out and bank feeds and all of that, people would say, you know, that would be kind of the end of bookkeeping and bookkeepers, and they'll become an extinct species. Have they managed to stay alive? Because I still see so much demand for bookkeepers, just even from accounting firms. You'd think that the ease of doing it for small businesses would have eliminated, but if anything, it's probably heightened it somehow. Why is that?
Look, your comment is quite right in terms of what was the fear factor when bank feeds came on. I was standing on a stage on behalf of one of the software companies with 700 people in the room, and I explained to them the new feature in the software. It was MYOB's and first version of Get Statement. Before there was an automatic bank feed into the software, you'd hit this Get Statement button and electronically would come in it was the first version of bank feeds. And the room went deathly silent, because you had these bookkeepers going, but that's what I do. That's what I spend my life doing, sitting there keying stuff in. So you can imagine what era this was. This was 25, 30 years ago. But Michael, what it's done is the software have developed to go natural business process. We can bring in the bank data. We can use that to automatically reconcile, or it pulls out the transactions that aren't already in the system. The bookkeeper or the business owner or the accountant needs to process those omitted transactions. It helped the process. It moved us away from manual ledgers and rekeying every transaction to having the transaction in data, and we could do the right thing with it so much more efficiently. Over that 30 years, has doing business in Australia got any simpler? No, it hasn't. It keeps getting more complex. what we're able to do is we are able to do more efficiently and effectively. So an accounting practice can service more clients, a bookkeeping practice can service more clients, because you're able
Yeah.
to actually process quicker.
But you still need someone to process, basically, regardless of all the automations, regardless of the bank
Yep.
feeds and the ease of
So
it.
by process, I'm not
Yeah.
just saying historically process transactions that have
Yeah.
happened, but it's automating and integrating and getting the GST right, doing the payroll processing, making sure that the data comes in and gets processed the right way.
Now, you're in I guess, unique position as the chairman of COSBO, which is the Council of Small Business Organizations of Australia. So if a small business approaches you to ask you, what they should do with their bookkeeping, what advice would you give them? And for context, like the way I see it, there's multiple options for a small business these days. They could do their own, they could use an in-house bookkeeper, they could go to a bookkeeping practice, or they can go to an accounting firm. Those are kind of the four options that come to mind. What would you advise a small business these days?
So
What
that's
should they
more
do?
my role as ICB than it would be COSBOA. COSBOA is a association of associations, so it's a council of industry
Yes.
associations. So it acts as a real government advocacy voice for small business to government. So more of that, and then working with the industry association, such as ICB, rather than specific advice to individual businesses. That individual advice would be more ICB's world. And as we would say, what is the best way, the most efficient way for you to achieve your bookkeeping needs? Is it to the electrician that you or your partner will spend X amount of time doing this, and then you'll hand it over to the bookkeeper at the end of the quarter or the accountant end of the quarter, and they'll go and fix it up? You need expertise. You need to do what you do really well. So electrician, spend all your time being an electrician, but engage a professional who knows how to use the right software to actually use the software the most efficient way for your business. So what would I be saying to any business? I know my partner definitely wants to do the bookkeeping. That's great. Subscribe to the best software that suits the sort of business you're in. Consult with an expert in that software to help you use the software the right way and the current way. So either engaging the expert full-time, well, not full-time, but you know what I mean, on an ongoing basis,
Yep.
or engage with that consultant to set you up and train you properly on the way to do it. So for some businesses, do it yourself. For some businesses, we'll engage a bookkeeper internally. But either way, get the expertise to make sure you're using the software the right way.
I mean, has it become because it has become easier, right, for a business owner to do it themselves, or for their partner, as you said before, to just do the accounts and do the bases?
Michael, let me reverse that question to you. In your practice, how much easier has payroll got in the last 5 years? With the advent of single touch payroll version 1, the advent of now single touch payroll version 2, there's a lot.
I mean, just using the word single touch sounds like it's been
Yeah, it's a
simplified.
great branding exercise, wasn't it? But the complexity of payroll and getting the pay rates right, interpreting the awards, setting up your software right so that you're paying people the right amount, and now with the increased reporting through single touch payroll of getting the mapping right so that you're reporting the right data to the ATO, which then flows to Services Australia. So we've had and look, I'm a fan of single touch payroll. I'm a fan of single touch payroll phase 2. It's using digital payroll systems that has the data, and it's sending the data straight through instead of, in a Services Australia case, the individual employee having to work out what they got paid, how to fill in that rotten remuneration form to make sure they're getting the right payments. Now it'll fall out of your payroll. So it's the right journey, but it's complex. So for a small business
Mm.
person, it's still complex. You need to tap into the expertise of how to set up the payroll to pay people properly, how to set up payroll to report properly to the government the right way. GST arguably hasn't changed substantially over the years, but there's been tweaks to different systems. Think of the margin scheme for houses. Think of, there have been changes to the way things happen. So I think I've drifted away from your question, Michael, but we have digitized processes, we've automated processes, but business is still complex. So I still think the professionals absolutely have a role. And I'm struggling, Michael, to find a accountant or a bookkeeper or a representative of either of those professions that are going, oh, we've got accountants that are looking for work. I think we're still post-COVID and post some of the government initiatives, still trying to work out, how do we do this efficiently? Do I need to shred some clients, cut some clients off my list? And I'm hearing a lot of that going on, where both bookkeepers and accountants are going, this client's just problem after problem. They don't like paying me. I'm just not going to work with them anymore. I'd prefer to give a good professional service to the clients that appreciate what I'm doing.
Yeah, okay. Well, what are the biggest kind of threats to the industry that you see in the next 5, 10 years?
I'll bring that a little bit closer for the moment and just go, the lack of access to staff is quite a thing at the moment. Lack of access to staff, lack of access to people to work within your practice. And there's worker shortages across every industry in Australia at the moment. We know that, it's well documented. There's a Jobs and Skills Summit coming up from the government shortly to try and set a framework for the next era of Australia to try and overcome some of that. So lack of staff I see as a threat. The 5 to 10 years, what's the threat to our professions? I don't think we're in danger of extinction or in danger of anything, because businesses should be tapping into professionals to help them comply so that they can go on and do business, and they tap into the compliance experts and the business advice experts, the business improvement experts, the best use of software integration. And with a government's agenda, and for that matter, the planet's agenda, let's computerize, let's digitize, let's use data more. I don't see a big threat to either profession anytime soon.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess let's flip the question. What are the biggest opportunities for bookkeepers and bookkeeping firms?
To me, it is staying on the cutting edge of what you could improve business process by the best use of technology. It's staying on the cutting edge of change. There are some good government initiatives happening around us that will help with some of the compliance role. The opportunities for me for the bookkeeping profession is really tap into the best of breed technology to service the clients you've got or the industries that you wish to work within.
Okay. Has it become harder? Like, I guess if you think about what are the biggest challenges for them at the moment, is STP the biggest challenge? Is it just a lot of changes with ATO guidance? Like, what are some of the biggest kind of issues or challenges in the industry right now?
A practical challenge for the bookkeeping space at the moment is narrowing your scope, becoming an expert in a few, not trying to be an expert in everything available to you. Right? There's 4 different small business accounting packages dominant in our space. There's another 100 that offer similar functionalities. Should you be an expert in the 4 or the 104? Is it possible to be an expert in the 104 and do it properly? And then we can talk about the unique industry add-ons or the function add-ons, and there's 800 products easily in that space. How could you possibly be across 800 add-ons and every nuance? So to me, the challenge for a professional is be really good at what you want to be really good on, evaluate your
Yep.
options, and then become an expert in your chosen solution set.
To become just a Xero bookkeeper or a Maya bookkeeper, and that's it?
Look, as the two dominant in the small business accounting software space, I certainly know of some bookkeepers and accountants who've chosen, I'm only working
Yep.
with one.
Many.
I know of many that still offer across the platforms. So whether you choose to become just a Xero practice or just an MYB practice is a just conscious decision. But then when that new client comes to you, do you shift their software or do you work with them on the software they've got?
Yeah.
But
I think there would be a fear factor, right? Like in terms of, oh, if I just become a Xero person, then I'm going to miss out on all these clients on Reckon and Maya, etc. So I think it would be a difficult psychological kind of transition for
sure,
many to make.
sure. And there's efficiencies in narrowing the software platform you work to one, right? There's efficiencies in knowledge, there's efficiencies in approach, but then you've just got to deal with that new potential new client that might not be on your software you've chosen. Is it the right decision for that business to swap platforms? And it's not always, because brand N software might not have some of the features they're using in brand W software right now, and it's core to what they do.
You mentioned staffing as an issue. You mentioned many practices or bookkeeping firms are multi-person now. I think, given the emergence of cloud accounting, the fact that anything could be done from anywhere, what are your views on offshoring? And it's kind of multiple aspects to it. How much are bookkeeping firms going down that path to offshore some of their stuff versus, there's firms or BPOs in Philippines and India that can basically go to retail clients and do their bookkeeping for them from anywhere in the world for a fraction of the price now. What can you unpack that a little bit in terms of how offshoring is impacting the industry and how used it is?
Personally, I'm really very happy with the way the organisations that provide offshoring services have developed. So, 25 years ago, running my own small business practice, I worked with one of the offshorers or outsource providers at that time, sent a couple of end-of-year tax jobs to this offshore provider and regretted it from that moment forward. It simply didn't work, right? Yes, I paid lower fee, but the amount of supervision and rework and re-explanation to that offshore person, it was immense. Now, 25 years later, I'm observing a market that is very, very different. So some of the offshore service providers and organisations, they have enough Australian-based management or supervision going on, or Australian-trained managers that are managing the team offshore, and you're using workforces that are offshore. And some of those environments, I mean, you talked about the Philippines, our understanding of some of those workplaces in the Philippines, they're more secure, they've got better IT, they've got better backup systems than most practices in Australia would have, because their environment has been set up to be so cutting edge and so secure. We are seeing a growing trend and acceptability and utilisation by bookkeeping practices of offshore workers. So they have a team in Australia, but they certainly have a number of people offshore. And I alluded to before the worker shortages. Some of those multi-person practices, and we met with 3 owners of multi-person practices just recently, each of them are offshoring because they've been advertising in Australia for 2 years and they can't find anybody. The people don't exist. So they offshore as much of their work as is feasible to offshore. They don't want their client facing or their client interaction ownership offshore. They have those people, that client manager, and that's hard to find as well. There's just nobody available in Australia in so many cases. So
Why is that? Why do you feel that's the issue? Well, that's the case, and how can that be addressed?
That's the issue of the government's job summit coming up. COVID has really hit our workforce in Australia quite remarkably. So
Just from the migration perspective, or just the fact that the unemployment rate is so low? Like, what's been the impact of COVID?
it's taken people out of the workforce. It's certainly because there has been no migration into Australia, that part of the workforce has diminished. Right now, it's a supply and demand equation. I'm prepared to supply my
Mm,
labour. You can go onto the open market and sometimes get quite substantial enhancements to your pay by shopping around a little
yeah.
bit. We're also hearing the converse, actually, that it's not as bad as the media are representing, so that pays are quite flat in some places. But there's just a personnel shortage, and it seems, again, to our discussion earlier, things haven't got simpler. Michael, work hasn't gone
Mm.
away in the accounting and bookkeeping space. There's still a truckload of work out there, and we need people to take it on. Um,
But do you feel offshoring could be a threat to the industry where a lot of those BPOs with, Australian experience will now start to target, the SME market directly versus going via a bookkeeping firm in Australia?
It'll be a journey to watch. Most of those organisations that are totally offshore and offering the $25 an hour bookkeeping service or whatever, they're doing old school bookkeeping. They're coding, they're coding bank
Mm.
feeds. They're not actually working with the business to improve that business and such things. So I don't think the professional bookkeeper or the professional accountant is under threat. That data processing, I would encourage you, if you're doing historic data processing, I think there is a very valid argument to look at some of that offshore processing.
Yeah, okay. Now we talked about, well, we haven't touched on it to a degree that I was thinking of, but I remember at ABE conference, the concept of business advisory but coming from a bookkeeper, yeah, was something that was quite prominent. What's that? What does business advisory from a bookkeeper's perspective look like versus, say, business advisor, which is now, kind of the buzzword in the accounting world as well? Is it the same? Is it different? What's your view on that?
You say business advisory is the buzzword in the accounting industry now. I think I was going to conferences and training in 1990s that told me that business advisory was the only way an accounting practice was going to
Is,
survive.
is,
So
is that like Paul Dunn and the
correct.
results?
Paul Dunn
Yeah,
was
yeah,
ahead of
okay.
his time, right? The work he did
Yep.
and his thinking was absolutely ahead of his time. But so the results accounting system, we got involved in that. We followed some of their techniques, and that certainly influenced the way I ran my practice and the way we approach the bookkeeping association as well. Um, what is business advisory, Michael? The definition is humongous. What is bookkeeping? The definition is humongous. What's accounting? The definition is humongous, right? Business advisory fits into everything bookkeeper, not everything. Business advisory fits into aspects of what a bookkeeper does. Business advisory can fit
Yep.
into aspects of what an accountant does. Some accountants do business advisory and some don't. Some talk to businesses, as do bookkeepers,
Mm.
about, hey, what's going on in your cash flow? What are you making money out of? What
Yep.
aren't you making money out of? What business systems have you got in place? Hang on, if we brought this bit of software in, instead of us spending 10 hours a week doing it, this software will automate that process and you'll do it in an hour a week. So now you've got 9 more
Yep.
hours to go and sell your things to more clients. Is that all business advisory? Absolutely. So um,
100%. Yep.
I think business advisory fits into the professional bookkeeper's profile as it should into the professional accountant's profile. But know what you're advising on. Don't pretend to advise if you don't actually know the area, and don't
Mm.
advise on financial planning stuff unless you're a licensed financial planner.
Yeah. But do you feel it's just like the way a bookkeeper looks at business advisory and A, should they be doing it? Or should they just stick to the books? And B, like the way accountants are moving towards business advisory, which is like the old kind of Paul Dunn model.
So can
Is it
I
the
be
same
narking,
type?
Michael, and say, haven't you listened to me for the
Yes.
last 45 minutes? What have I said a professional bookkeeper does? Uses cutting edge technology, is aware of cutting edge technology, and improves the natural business process of every business they work for. That's
Yeah.
business advice. That's improving their business process. So you use the term, should they stick to the books? Well, to me, sticking to the books is improving the business process of a business. Sticking to the books, old
Mm.
age data processing, that's not bookkeeping anymore. I'm sorry, the accounting firms who think just data processing the bank feed is bookkeeping, you're out of touch. That is not what a professional bookkeeper does anymore.
What percentage of the bookkeeping world would you classify as professional bookkeepers based on your definition of it?
Heading to 50 to 70%.
Wow. Okay. Because in my head, I thought it'd be like 10 to 20 that would fall into your
Now,
definition of it.
clearly, Michael, in
Um,
my role, Professional Association for Bookkeepers, who do we talk to? Who attracting? Who sees the benefit in being part of an association? The better
yeah,
bookkeeper,
the
right?
best.
So
Yeah,
the
okay.
ones that go, hey, I'd love a resource base. I'd love to be able to tap into some support. I'd love to be on the
Mm.
information channel that keeps me knowing what government's doing and knowing what the software companies are doing, knowing what.
So naturally more
So
growth-oriented
our
ones. Yeah.
touch point, as with all associations, is that progressive professional. So in my community, 50 to 70% are absolutely on that line.
Yeah, okay. Matthew, rapid fire questions. What's your favorite quote?
Favorite quote. Oh, you didn't warn me about that one. In our pre-prep, you told me you were going to ask five. Look, I'm tempted to go to that wonderful Robin Williams quote in "Seize the Day."
Seize the day. Carpe diem. Um, what have you read or watched or learned recently that's had the greatest impact on you?
Watched, learned, or had the greatest impact. I'll come back to that one. Ask me your next one.
What have you bought recently that's had an impact on you?
Just as COVID was hitting Australia, I bought a new Hyundai Kona Highlander. In 2 years, it's travelled far less kilometres than it should have. So that was the purchase of a brand new car just before the supply problems hit, and you can't get new cars anymore. So
True. Um, what book or books should bookkeepers be reading? What do you recommend to your community?
Oh, great question. Look, I think a professional bookkeeper should certainly be tapping into good resources and good core information and staying up to date. So if I have somebody who's been doing it themselves or going, look, I really want to check, the Bookkeeping for Dummies is a great primary resource. And then I'd suggest they go and
Mm.
tap into Cert 4s, and then I'd tap into the software company training and manuals. So
Wait, when you come across people in your community, is there anything that you see that's like that they're doing wrong? Like, I guess what are the most typical things that you see most bookkeeping firms do wrong or bookkeepers do wrong? You just shake your head at.
there's the ones that haven't updated, for instance, their payroll knowledge for 20 years. They were trained by the
Mm.
person who did it in the business previously, and they're just still doing
Yeah.
it the way they were trained 20 years ago. And to me, that's just a tragedy. We're in a different world now. We have so much better payroll software. We have so much better accounting software that you really need to have updated your knowledge. Some of the
Mm.
questions that from time to time we'll get from our student community or from that new member who goes, oh, I'm doing it this way because I was told to. And you just look and go, you've been underpaying these people for 15 years, right? So the tragedy is when they don't tap into current knowledge and current expertise.
Yeah. Okay. Last question. Who would you want to have a drink with the most in the world, past or present?
Look, right at the moment, I'd love to share some time with our new Prime Minister and understand truly what his scope is for business and the business future. We're getting a little bit of that in the media and in the way the government's performing, but that would be my chosen beer at the moment.
What would be the one question? If you could only answer one question, what would it be?
Of Albanese, of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
How much priority does he put on the small businesses' future in terms of the economy of Australia?
Okay, sounds like a fair question. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. It's been
Thanks, Michael, and you've allowed me to dodge one of your questions, so that was excellent. Appreciated the time, appreciate the chance to speak to you and your audience. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you for tuning in and hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like our podcast and share it on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or wherever it is you hang out so more people can benefit from these speakers. Also, please subscribe on our website so you get all of our latest episodes. And if there's anything else I can help you with, or you have speakers you'd love to hear from, or some feedback about the current episode, please feel free to send an email to michael@recruitmentexpert.com.au. Until then, take care, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.